Chapter 3. 15 minutes later, Gwendraeth James entered the reception room at Treddeg Rectory. He'd left Harry Warden covering the scene of the incident and was now anxious to push his inquiries further. He banged the bell on the desk, and a tall man dressed in grey, who looked vaguely familiar, appeared. "Well, Inspector, I'm the one who gets to ask the questions." "Sorry, didn't realise the police were so sensitive." Michael Portman. The ex-cabinet minister, Gwendraeth thought. The one who'd had to resign after knocking off that lobbyist. What was her name? Carol Hitchens? "I didn't know you owned the place, sir." "Bought it about 6 months ago." "Any objections?" A man to be careful with, Gwendraeth thought. A man used to getting his own way, if he could. "I've come about the incident with the car. I'm afraid I have to tell you. I'm the one who found him, man." Michael Portman interrupted. "I know Parker Merriam's dead. I reported it." Michael Portman led the way through to a private sitting room at the back of the building. In the dark brown painted room were a couple of leather-covered wing chairs that flanked the fireplace, in front of which was a brass coffee table. There were framed etchings on the wall. One of Westminster Bridge, Gwendraeth noted. Obviously, Portman didn't want to leave his past behind him entirely. "How long will this take?" "Depends, sir. There's a routine questions to start." "What kind of questions?" "Your relationship with the dead man, his status here, time of departure, why he was driving that particular vehicle, that kind of questions." Michael Portman took a deep breath and then settled himself. He was used to it, Gwendraeth thought. He'd been the kind of politician who'd appeared to thrive on opposition. A tricky situation was just routine to him. Once he'd accustomed himself to it. Portman now leaned back in his chair and put the tips of his fingers together. It was a mannerism Gwendraeth had seen him use on television, sometimes to lethal effect. "Parker Merriam left this morning at approximately 8:30, Portman said, "to go shopping in Maisebont. There was nothing unusual in that. He was a man who always avoided crowds if he could. He appeared to be normal, not agitated in any way. And oh yes, he borrowed the car because the owner had given us all standing permission to use it. He now no longer drives himself." "That would be Paul James," Gwendraeth said, consulting his notes. "Yes." "And you didn't notice anything unusual in all this?" "Nothing. I don't know what happened. Parker must have driven up that track hundreds of times before. He knows its pitfalls well, particularly the last tricky piece, where the car went over." "Naturally. And you can think of no reason why he might have deliberately driven over the edge." "Let's get this straight, Inspector. Parker Merriam was not a depressive. He was a retired college lecturer with an active interest in the local flora and fauna. He kept bees. He has 2 hives on the common land at the back." "Why was he here then, sir?" "I don't follow. He was fit. He was active. He had interests. Why did he need to rent a room at Treddeg?" Michael Portman stood and stretched, perhaps signalling that the interview should end, Gwendraeth thought. "People don't rent rooms here, Inspector. Let us say we have residents of a certain kind who can afford the kind of facilities and stimulation we provide." "Do you mean conservatives?" "If you like, yes. But we are interested in a deeper meaning. We have seminars, guest speakers. We are interested in a philosophical underpinning beyond the mere play of market forces." Michael Portman could be formidable, Gwendraeth realised. There was an inner intensity about him that resonated. He was obviously enjoying playing to an audience, even an audience of one that didn't agree with him. "Can I see Paul James now?" The question was sudden, even abrupt. If it indicated a certain antagonism, Michael Portman would just have to live with it, Gwendraeth thought. Michael Portman nodded and led the way out of the private sitting room into the hallway and up what looked like a recently installed pine staircase. At the top of this was a corridor with bedrooms that branched off it. "Last one on the left," Michael Portman said quietly. "Take it easy with him. He's not a well man." Gwendraeth James found the bedroom without any difficulty. The door was open, and a thin man in a dark blue silk robe sat in a wicker chair at the side of the bed. His skin had an almost waxy appearance, and his eyes were sunken but bright. What remained of his hair was plastered neatly to his head, and incongruously to Gwendraeth, he was wearing a collar and tie. "Come in, Inspector." "You're expecting me?" Paul James nodded. "Terrible business. I liked Parker, you know. I would have got rid of the car if I'd known this was going to happen." "Can't be helped." "Not now. No. It's too late." "Did you find out anything?" Gwendraeth was just about to launch into his usual speech about not being allowed to divulge information during the course of an investigation when Paul James spoke again. "He was not a happy man, you know." "No?" "No. But by that I don't mean he was depressed. Parker was much too sanguine for that. He had too many interests. No. I mean, he was worried about his daughter. She lived somewhere near." "Did she visit?" "No. Not that I saw. And I think that must have been part of the problem. When he moved down here, I think he'd hoped to see more of her. But it didn't happen." "Any idea why?" Paul James drew himself upright in his chair. He was frail, but he could still be determined, Gwendraeth noticed. "We're not like your generation, Inspector. We're altogether more reticent in emotional matters. I'm sure you must have noticed." Now Paul James seemed to be looking past him as he made his pronouncement. Gwendraeth acknowledged the obvious truth of his statement. His relationship with his own father was full of such difficulties. Places where, for that older generation, words were not necessary or even allowed. His uncle was the same. "You did give Parker Merriam permission to use your car," he said after a while. "Of course. It's a standing thing. Parker didn't even have to ask. I'm sure Michael Portman told you that." Gwendraeth nodded and looked around the room. There were a few books, mostly about religious matters, on the shelf opposite the window. A small TV set sat on a table near the end of the bed. Paul James seemed to have reduced his needs to a minimum. "I am less and less interested in the material," the thin man sitting upright in the chair in the corner of the room said quietly. "Nevertheless, 'tis upsetting to think someone might be trying to get at me." "Pardon?" Gwendraeth wanted to be sure that he wasn't making a mistake in what he was hearing. "I think you understood me, Inspector," Paul James said. "I don't think it was an accident that Parker Merriam was killed while driving my car. And last night, someone tried to break into my room. I heard something at the window." Gwendraeth James' first reaction was to dismiss this as the rambling of a man who was perhaps less cogent than he first appeared. But what Paul James said next seriously caught his attention. "Like anyone else my age, I have regrets. I have done things of which I am not proud." "What kind of things?" But even as he asked the question, Gwendraeth knew he was not going to get the kind of answer he wanted. He'd been too direct, without respect for the complicated psychological defenses of someone as experienced as the man who sat in front of him. "The usual, Inspector. Sins of omission and commission." All of a sudden, it seemed to Gwendraeth that the timbre of the conversation had shifted. He was being dismissed. Paul James seemed pale, exhausted. Gwendraeth James told him quietly that he would tell Michael Portman to increase security all around. Then he said goodbye and left the room, grateful to be heading in the direction of the open air. Outside the old rectory, the tide was coming in fast. Foam-capped waves followed hard upon each other, landing in a flood on the beach and then retreating. Gwendraeth looked up and saw a hang glider launch itself off a cliff about a mile away. The elaborate blue and red wings lifted for a moment and then hung there as if suspended from the horizon. Gwendraeth decided to have a quick word with Michael Portman before going back up the track to where he knew Harry Warden would still be waiting.